Hello, I'm Patrick Farnsworth. Welcome to Access and Privacy Online Commentary. FIPA President Mike Larsen recently delivered a lecture focusing on surveillance and privacy. It's something that we thought our regular listeners would be interested in, so we recorded a version for this week's commentary. Let's take a look at why privacy matters and why it matters right now.
Hi there. Mike Larsen here. I'm FIPA's current president, and in my other role, my day job, I am a faculty member in the criminology department at Kwantlen Polytechnic University on unceded Coast Salish territories here in British Columbia. And in my role as an academic and as a teacher, I try wherever possible to work on issues that are connected to my passion for information rights and privacy rights. And that's really the connection between my academic work and the work that I do with FIPA. And one of the more specific ways this happens is through an upper year undergraduate course that I teach on surveillance, privacy, and control. I actually just finished wrapping up a semester teaching this course in the spring. One of the benefits of this course is that it really encourages me to keep on top of current developments in surveillance and privacy, and also to stay connected with the ways that my students interpret these issues from really diverse vantage points, how they're kind of approaching these questions. My students for this course are always a self-selected group, in the sense that I doubt that they would actually enroll in a course like this, and particularly with me, unless they were already curious about and engaged in thinking about surveillance and privacy quite seriously. And I'm always impressed and inspired by how little they resemble this kind of caricature of the post-privacy young person. Someone, we often hear described this person who is, has embraced the nothing to hide, nothing to fear narrative, who consents to privacy terms without thinking about them, who regards expanding surveillance as inevitable and unproblematic, believes that privacy is, if it's not dead, then a quaint idea from a bygone era. This is not the people that I work with. To the contrary, I find that my students care deeply about privacy, and they recognize its importance as both a human right and an instrumental good. I find that they have nuanced understandings of themselves as people who simultaneously believe in principles of consent and the importance of the reasonable expectation of privacy, while also, being deeply and problematically enmeshed in digital ecosystems that have an insatiable appetite for their personal information. Many of them are also pursuing careers that will find them on the other end of the surveillance and privacy equation as professionals exercising extraordinary powers in some cases, of search and seizure, for example, and also handling deeply sensitive, confidential personal information and having to respect that. So because they approach these issues with such an interesting and nuanced perspective, I find that I don't really have to spend much time at the outset of the course making the case for why privacy matters. In a sense, it would be preaching to the converted, and we're able to kind of hit the ground running, really exploring some of the history, the research, case studies related to privacy, and really building a base of knowledge. But I do return to this theme of why privacy matters at the end of the course, because I think it helps actually for us to step back from all the really nuanced, detailed stuff we've been looking at and help pull it all together. And so what I have here is a bit of a condensed version of my concluding lecture for this course, which focuses on why privacy matters in general and why in particular it matters today. And I'm happy to share that with you. Privacy is a foundational right, and it underpins freedom, autonomy, and democratic participation. I think it's important for us to view it not as a luxury or a preference, something that maybe is relevant here and there, but rather as a core condition for the functioning of a free and democratic society. One that empowers individuals and communities, enables self-determination, and places limits on the power of states and corporations. Privacy enables us to develop our identities, and to do so with a degree of confidence, free from scrutiny, to explore ideas, express ourselves without fear of monitoring or judgment. It protects the boundaries of thought, belief, and association, other fundamental rights. When surveillance is omnipresent, as it tends to be in modern societies, particularly in a digital age, these boundaries can collapse, and that can inhibit democratic engagement, creativity, identity formation, and dissent. So privacy is essential to human flourishing. And that goes for everybody. But I think especially for marginalized groups who are more vulnerable to profiling, discrimination, scrutiny, and efforts around social control by state and other entities. Privacy is essential for safeguarding against the ways in which that kind of scrutiny, that kind of monitoring can inhibit participation in democratic society. And surveillance, whether by governments or private corporations, poses a profound challenge to privacy. And this goes for, in the current context, facial recognition technologies, social media profiling, and a whole variety of other, new and emerging technologies that are under the surveillance umbrella. All of these things mean that we are increasingly subject to systems that monitor, analyze, and influence our actions, often without our full awareness or consent. And when we do have consent, it's not always informed consent. It's not always consent that's based on a capacity to negotiate or a capacity to truly understand the implications of what is being asked. Privacy harms are not limited to breaches or leaks. They're actually embedded in systems that normalize surveillance as the price of participation in society and commerce and sociability in so many aspects of modern culture. Surveillance is often packaged as convenience, a mechanism for personalization, or even a vehicle for authenticity. And consent tends to be engineered through defaults, through nudges. Privacy is deeply connected to the issue of consent. And it should be connected to this. And at the end of the day, privacy, in many ways, is about our capacity to control the borders that exist between our identities and our personal information, and the views of others, the ability of others to view us, rather, and to collect that information. So our consent and our autonomy are crucially central to questions of privacy. But consent is not the limit of discussions of privacy. Rather, we can't simply rely on user choice and clicking of terms and conditions to govern how information is collected and used in the current context. Systemic protections, limits on data collection, strong encryption, limits on the reasonable grounds for the collection of personal information are essential as kind of augments to these foundational issues of consent. We need really proper safeguards. And this is particularly important today, where we live in a context where the dominant digital platforms, which are so ingrained in our everyday life, they operate under this model that Shoshana Zuboff has rightly claimed and called surveillance capitalism. And this involves the commodification of human experience through data extraction, through behavioral prediction. That model, which none of us really had the opportunity to look at and consent to before it became, one of the dominant forms of commerce, of capitalism, the current context, right? We grew up with this, many of us, and have come to live in this society where this is normalized. It treats users, this model, as not as customers, but really as the raw material for the generation of what Zuboff refers to as behavioral futures, predictive products that are bought and sold for profit. And that means that the most intimate aspects of our lives become these data points that are used for marketing, but not just marketing, also for manipulation, because the mechanisms that can facilitate the prediction of human behavior, which are voracious for data, because this is how they do that, they can also enable the manipulation of human behavior, and in a whole variety of ways that have really serious consequences for us as a society, not least of which is the poisoning of our shared base of knowledge and truth, the increasing polarization of society, and the creation of massive misinformation and disinformation machines that really undermine the very notions and foundations of democracy. These harms associated with this, with surveillance capitalism, are not merely individual, but they themselves are also structural, and they definitely undermine democratic agency. They distort the digital public sphere, and this is one of the great challenges of our time, is how to grapple with this. So how do we grapple with this? I think we need strong legal safeguards. and I'm certainly not the only one to argue for this. We need better laws. We need new laws, better laws. We need transparent oversight of all these mechanisms that impact our privacy. And we need public resistance to these trends, to the voracious appetite of corporations, of organizations for personal information, of the erosion of expectations of privacy, the normalization and creeping expansion of surveillance. Surveillance practices have to be subject to robust public scrutiny, to legal constraint, and to meaningful democratic control. And that means it's essential for us to push for law reform that's forward-looking, informed by deep commitments to privacy. Forward-looking meaning that we need laws today that understand not only the world that we live in now, an increasingly digital society where information is flowing in multiple different directions, but a society in which these trends will continue into the future in new ways, in ways that may be foreseeable or otherwise. We need laws that provide a foundation for us to grapple with the challenges of today and also the challenges of tomorrow. So forward-looking. Fit-for-purpose privacy laws really need to account for example, automated systems that collect and act on personal information. And these systems must not be allowed to operate in a vacuum. Decision-making processes involving surveillance technologies must be reviewable, contestable, and accountable. And so we can't outsource surveillance to algorithms or privatize the collection of personal information through vendor contracts that are beyond scrutiny. Individuals have to have the right to know when they're being monitored, why, and how to challenge it. And so human-focused systems that really emphasize oversight and accountability and don't simply treat artificial intelligence as this inevitable expansionary thing that has net positive for everybody. This is essential. And this is a tall order. This means that we really do need some fundamental reworkings of our current privacy laws and the laws governing surveillance. And these things have to be integrated. We have to think about them cohesively. In other words, we don't want to have laws that focus on a very traditional idea of privacy as the right to be left alone, and then a whole separate set of regulations that deal with artificial intelligence and algorithmic decision-making that don't really touch on that. We have to have a holistic view of these things. We also have to have a holistic view of the ways in which the collection, use, and disclosure of personal information for a variety of reasons straddles this divide that we have in our laws in Canada between the public sector and the private sector. Increasingly, these things are intertwined. Public bodies that have incredible powers and authorities for surveillance, for example, are increasingly using sophisticated but proprietary private sector applications and facilities for actually effectuating this kinds of surveillance. And so there's that real blurring between private and public that must be accounted for effectively. Canadian law often frames privacy, and this is not exclusive to Canada, as an individual right. Again, that foundational idea of an individual's reasonable expectation of privacy or a right to be left alone. But many communities, and I'll emphasize particularly First Nations and Indigenous communities in Canada, understand privacy in collective terms. And there's a great deal of merit to this, I think, in thinking about how we approach privacy going forward, without losing sight of the individual rights aspect of privacy. There is a need, I think, to think about how privacy rights, privacy laws are involved in the protection of cultural knowledge, of relationships, of community-held data, of the capacities of communities to function as communities, for example. And there's a number of Indigenous governance frameworks, including the OCAP principles, for example, in Canada, that we could really benefit from integrating into privacy law and in the regulation of surveillance in general, but certainly we must integrate into the way that we govern privacy laws, specifically in relation to Indigenous communities in Canada. Surveillance practices and privacy laws must not undermine Indigenous self-determination or data sovereignty. And privacy has to remain a public priority. It's something that we haven't seen really foregrounded in recent elections, provincially, federally. It's one of those issues that tends to fall off the side of the platform when parties are vying for power. And that's despite the fact that when we conduct public opinion research, we consistently find that people take privacy seriously. They find value in it, and they're concerned about its potential erosion. there's that narrative that privacy is dead. And that narrative, I think, really serves powerful interests, and it obscures the ongoing struggle over who controls personal information and under what rules. So I would say this, that privacy is not dead, but it is under pressure. And I think that protecting it is essential to ensuring that technology serves the public and not the other way around, which is, I think, the nightmare scenario that Zuboff draws our attention to. So for these reasons and for many more, I think it's important to really foreground privacy as a priority for law reform, for policy reform, because ultimately it serves as a guarantor of so many other aspects of the rights that we hold dear, rights to association and expression, and to the very principles of autonomy and consent that really kind of are foundational to modern democratic societies. We deserve good privacy policies. And we need to wrap our heads around the methods that we can use to push elected officials, to push legislatures, to get with the times and to modernize our laws. I think if we do this effectively, if we're able to achieve this, Canada can be a world leader in the protection of privacy. But if we fail to do it, then what will end up happening is what has been happening, which is that technologies that enable the collection, use, disclosure of personal information, technologies that erode our privacy rights will continue to be developed. They'll continue to be adopted and used, and the law will continue to lag behind and occasionally play this kind of remedial catch-up role without proper privacy boundaries and rules. Surveillance tends to have its own kind of momentum. And so it can't be checked unless there is a deliberate effort to do so. And that's, I think, something we need to call for urgently. Thanks.
Access and Privacy Online reviews the headlines and delivers deeper commentary on a regular basis. Be sure to subscribe to get the full episodes every week and get notifications when we release show segments and other commentary throughout the week. We look forward to hearing from you soon. Have a good one.